When Amelia signed the papers for the old two-story house on Willow Lane, she convinced herself she was buying peace. The city had been gnawing at her nerves for years. The traffic, the constant glow of billboards outside her apartment, the muffled sounds of neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls. She thought she wanted silence. She thought she wanted space. The house stood slightly back from the road, hidden behind tall, skeletal trees that cast long shadows across the front porch. Its windows were large, old-fashioned panes that seemed to catch every ounce of light in the day and turn hollow at night. The realtor had called it full of character. Amelia noticed how draft crept through the cracked frames when the wind blew, but she smiled politely, signed the papers, and told herself she would get used to the quirks. The first night, after she stacked her boxes inside the living room, Amelia sat cross-legged on the dusty hardwood floor, eating takeout noodles by the glow of her phone screen. The house creaked around her in the way old houses often do. Pipes groaned faintly. Wood popped as if it remembered footsteps from long ago. She reminded herself she was alone now, and that had been the whole point. She left most of the boxes unopened until morning. There was no rush, she reasoned. She had time. But one thing she did unpack was a small circular mirror framed in warm brass. It had belonged to her grandmother, passed down through her mother, and Amelia always carried it with her to new places. She sat on a mantel above the cold fireplace and caught her reflection, pale from the move, hair tied messily back, eyes shadowed with exhaustion but glinting faintly with relief. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the big windows, making the dust motes shimmer in the air like drifting particles of gold. Amelia explored the house properly. The kitchen was narrow but long, with faded green cabinets and a stubborn oven that didn't want to light at first. Upstairs, two bedrooms faced each other across a hallway. One was clearly meant as a guest room, smaller and tucked beneath the slant of the roof. The larger one, hers now, had a tall mirror bolted to the closet door. Its frame was painted white, chipped in places, but it reflected the room brightly. Amelia paused there longer than she expected. She studied herself in the tall glass. She looked tired but freer somehow, as if she'd shed a layer of tension by leaving the city. She pressed her fingertips to the cool surface, laughing at herself for the small ritual. New beginnings. Fresh starts. That night, she dragged a mattress onto the bedroom floor and slept with the window cracked open. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves, the trees whispering outside. She dreamed of walking through endless hallways, every doorway lined with mirrors. Each time she looked into one, she saw herself, but her reflection never moved quite in sync. In some, her reflection smiled when she did not. In others, it turned its head a moment too late. She woke just before dawn, heart thudding. The room was gray with early light, and her breath made a faint cloud in the cold air. The tall mirror on the closet door stood in front of her, still and ordinary, reflecting the rumpled blankets around her. She stared at it for a long moment, telling herself it had only been a dream. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that when she blinked, her reflection had blinked just slightly later. By the third day, Amelia had begun settling in properly. She unpacked kitchenware, hung up a few pictures, and stacked books against the living room wall. She was alone most of the time, though she heard a neighbor's dog bark faintly in the distance now and then. At night, she noticed how dark the street became. Willow Lane had no streetlights, and when the sun set, the house seemed suspended in blackness, its windows reflecting only the inside. One evening, she was brushing her teeth in the small upstairs bathroom when she noticed something strange. The bathroom mirror was slightly fogged with steam, but her reflection seemed wrong. Her arm moved a half-second behind hers as she lifted the toothbrush. Her reflection's eyes seemed wider, almost startled, though her own felt calm. She leaned closer to the glass, narrowing her eyes, and the reflection narrowed its eyes back. Perfectly this time. No delay. Amelia exhaled a shaky laugh, blaming the trick of steam and bad lighting. She wiped the mirror with her palm, leaving streaks across the surface. Everything appeared normal again. But that night, she dreamt of mirrors once more. This time, she stood in her living room, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling reflections. In each one, she saw herself, but they were slightly altered versions. One smiled with teeth too sharp. Another's eyes were hollow pits. Another turned its back entirely, refusing to look at her at all. She tried to step away, but the reflections all pressed their palms against the glass in unison, leaning forward as though eager to push through. She woke with her chest tight, throat dry. In the silence, she heard a faint tap. It was coming from downstairs. Amelia sat upright, straining her ears. Another tap, deliberate like a fingernail against glass. Slowly, she climbed out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The sound came from the living room. She descended, each step creaking faintly under her weight. In the living room, the boxes were still stacked by the wall. Moonlight spilled through the front windows, casting pale rectangles across the floor. The old brass-framed mirror sat on the mantel. For a long moment, everything looked still. Then the tap came again, soft but distinct from the surface of the mirror. Her breath caught. She stepped closer, bare feet whispering against the floorboards. The mirror reflected the room as expected. The dark fireplace, the scattered boxes, her own silhouette. Nothing unusual. She leaned close, heart hammering. Maybe a branch had hit the window outside, and she'd mistaken the sound. Maybe. Her reflection blinked. She hadn't. Amelia stumbled back, pulse racing. The reflection was still now, mirroring her wide eyes, her parted lips. She backed away slowly until her calves hit the couch, then sank down, clutching the blanket she had left there earlier. She stayed like that until the first light of morning crept into the house. The next day, Amelia tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, moving stress, lack of sleep. She forced herself to stay busy, cleaning, arranging, and focusing on practical tasks. Yet every reflective surface caught her attention. The tall mirror upstairs, the bathroom mirror, the brass one downstairs. She couldn't look into them for long without a prickle running down her spine. She called her mother that evening, seeking some grounding in familiarity. "How's the new place?" her mother asked warmly. "It's good," Amelia said, forcing cheer into her voice. "Quiet. A little too quiet sometimes." Her mother chuckled. "That's what you wanted, wasn't it?" "Yeah," Amelia said. She hesitated. "Do you ever, I don't know, feel strange around mirrors?" Her mother paused. "Mirrors? Why do you ask?" "No reason," Amelia said quickly, laughing it off. "Just, this house has a lot of them. Makes me feel like I'm never really alone." "Well," her mother said gently, "sometimes silence can play tricks. You'll adjust." Amelia hung up not long after, but her mother's reassurance didn't quiet the unease. That night, she avoided looking into the tall mirror before bed, keeping her gaze fixed firmly on the floor as she switched off the lamp. But as she drifted into sleep, she had the distinct feeling that her reflection was still watching her. The following day, Amelia woke to the sound of rain pattering against the roof. It was steady, soft at first, then heavier, filling the air with a constant murmur. She welcomed it. The rain muffled the silence that had unnerved her, made the house feel less hollow. She brewed coffee in the stubborn old kitchen and sat by the window with a book, though her eyes barely skimmed the words. Every so often, she glanced at the brass-framed mirror across the room. The reflection showed her exactly as she was, sitting on the chair, holding the mug, the book limp in her lap. Still, her stomach tightened each time her gaze landed on it, as though she expected the reflection to slip out of sync again. Around noon, she forced herself upstairs to tackle the unpacked boxes in her bedroom. Rain streaked down the windows, turning the world outside into a blurred gray wash. She stacked her books on a shelf, hung a few clothes in the closet, and pushed empty boxes into the hallway. The tall mirror on the closet door loomed over her every time she turned. At one point, she thought she saw her reflection smile, faintly though her lips had not moved. But when she stared directly, it was only her own pale face, unsmiling, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. She laughed uneasily under her breath. "I'm just tired," she told the empty room, as if saying it aloud would make it true. That night, The rain eased into a drizzle. Amelia curled on the couch in the living room with her grandmother's old quilt around her shoulders. She left the television on for company, letting the flickering light fill the room. The brass mirror reflected the TV glow, her silhouette shifting faintly each time the screen changed scenes. At some point, she dozed off. She woke with a start. The TV screen had gone black. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the clock on the wall. For a moment, Amelia wasn't sure what had pulled her from sleep. Then she realized the reflection in the brass mirror wasn't sitting on the couch. Her heart stopped. She was there. She could see herself, blanket around her shoulders, posture slouched from sleep. But in the mirror, her reflection stood. Not on the couch, but in the middle of the room, motionless, facing her directly. Amelia squeezed her eyes shut. When she opened them, the reflection was gone. The mirror showed only her again, curled beneath the quilt, wide-eyed with fear. Her breath trembled out in shallow bursts. She grabbed the remote, switched the TV back on, and left it playing until dawn. By the time morning arrived, she felt unsteady. She tried to rationalize it, a dream layered onto reality, exhaustion twisting her perception. But deep down, she knew what she had seen. The next day, she avoided mirrors entirely. She brushed her teeth without looking up, dressed without glancing at the closet door, and kept the brass mirror covered with a sheet. But avoiding them only heightened her paranoia. Every reflective surface felt like a threat. Even the window glass caught her eye. She began to notice how her reflection seemed to linger for an extra heartbeat when she turned away, like it was reluctant to let her go. That evening, she forced herself to confront it. She stood before the tall closet mirror, fists clenched at her sides, determined to prove to herself that it was nothing but her imagination. Her reflection stared back. "Move," Amelia whispered. She raised her right hand slowly, deliberately. The reflection raised its left. Her stomach dropped. "No," she breathed. She moved her left hand. The reflection lifted its right, copying her as though nothing was wrong. Perfectly synchronized. She leaned closer. "You're me," she whispered, as though saying it firmly might restore the balance. The reflection's lips curved into a faint, unnatural smile. Amelia stumbled back, nearly tripping over the bed frame. Her chest heaved, panic tightening around her ribs. She yanked an old bedsheet from the closet and flung it over the mirror, covering the surface completely. The fabric clung awkwardly but hid the glass from sight. Only then did she feel she could breathe again. Sleep came fitfully that night. Her dreams were thick with distorted reflections. In one, she stood in the brass-framed mirror, staring out into the room. She raised her hand, tried to wave, tried to call out, but the version of her sitting on the couch didn't move. Didn't notice. She pounded on the glass, desperate, but no sound emerged. When she woke, sweat clung to her neck. Her throat ached as though she had been shouting. She stumbled downstairs for water, rubbing her eyes. When she entered the living room, she froze. The sheet she had draped over the brass mirror had slipped to the floor. The mirror gleamed, uncovered, reflecting the room with quiet patience. Amelia's pulse spiked. She bent quickly, grabbed the sheet, and covered it again, this time pressing the corners tightly against the mantel so it wouldn't slip. She didn't notice, in her haste, that the reflection's hand had moved a fraction slower than hers when she reached for the fabric. That evening, a knock startled her. It was rare for anyone to come by. The house sat at the end of a nearly forgotten lane. She opened the door cautiously. A woman stood there, middle-aged, umbrella dripping with rain. "Hi. Sorry to bother you," the woman said kindly. "I'm your neighbor from down the road. Margaret." Amelia forced a smile of relief at the normalcy of another human face. "Oh, hello. I'm Amelia. Just moved in. I thought I'd bring you a little something," Margaret said, holding up a small tin wrapped in foil. "Welcome to the neighborhood. It can get quiet out here." Amelia accepted the tin gratefully. "Thank you. That's really kind." Margaret's eyes drifted past her into the living room. Her smile faltered for the briefest moment. "You've covered the mirrors," she said softly. Amelia blinked. "What?" Margaret pointed with a tilt of her chin. "The sheet. Over the mantel. We used to do the same. A cold ripple spread through Amelia. What do you mean? Margaret's expression tightened. For a moment, she looked as though she regretted speaking. Just this house is old. People say strange things about it. But you don't need to worry. Most of it is stories. What kind of stories? Amelia pressed. Margaret gave a small shake of her head. Don't pay me any mind. I'll let you settle in. But, she hesitated, then added, if the mirrors bother you, it's better not to look too long. My grandmother used to say reflections remember more than they should. Amelia stood frozen in the doorway as Margaret turned and walked back into the rain. That night, Amelia couldn't stop replaying her words. Reflections remember more than they should. She sat awake in bed, staring at the covered closet mirror. She could almost hear it, a faint hum of silence, as though something waited patiently behind the fabric. Just as her eyelids began to drift shut, a whisper brushed the edge of her thoughts. Not in the room, not in her ears, but from somewhere deeper. Let me in. Her eyes flew open. The room was empty, but the fabric covering the mirror rippled faintly, as though disturbed by breath on the other side. Amelia barely slept after that whisper. She lay frozen beneath her blanket, staring at the covered mirror, as if it might shift again. Each time she drifted towards sleep, she jolted awake, certain she'd heard faint scratching or a low sigh, only to realize the room was still. By morning, exhaustion weighed on her body like lead. She brewed coffee twice as strong as usual and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from the mug. The rain had stopped, but outside the windows, the world felt muted, washed pale. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. She tried distracting herself with chores, but the mirrors were everywhere. In the hallway, a decorative frame left by the previous owners. In the bathroom, fogging each morning with her breath. In her bedroom, looming from behind a sheet. She found herself avoiding her own reflection as though it might betray her again. Move when she didn't, smile when her lips stayed still, whisper words that weren't hers. By midday, she couldn't take the silence any longer. She grabbed her coat and walked down the long road toward Margaret's house. It was a small white cottage tucked behind a row of hedges. Margaret opened the door almost immediately, as though she had been expecting her. "Amelia," she said softly, her eyes kind but wary. "Come in." The cottage was warm, filled with the scent of herbs and baking bread. Amelia felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly just stepping inside. "I'm sorry to bother you," Amelia said, clutching her hands together. I need to ask. Last night you said something about mirrors. That your family used to cover them too. What did you mean? Margaret's face tightened. She gestured for Amelia to sit at the kitchen table, then poured her tea from a ceramic pot. "This house of yours," Margaret began, "has a history. People move in, people move out. Quickly, usually. They say strange things happen inside. Always with the mirrors. My grandmother lived there for a time, long ago. She warned us never to look too long. She said reflections can keep more than just appearances. They can keep pieces of us." Amelia shivered. "You mean like souls?" Margaret shook her head slightly. "Not exactly. More like fragments. Memories. Emotions. Sometimes even thoughts we try to hide." She believed the mirrors in that house don't just reflect. They hold on to what they see. And sometimes they give something back. Amelia's throat tightened. "I've been seeing things. My reflection moving wrong. Smiling when I didn't. Standing when I was sitting." Margaret's eyes softened with sympathy. "That's how it starts." A cold dread settled in Amelia's stomach. "What do I do?" Margaret hesitated. "Most people leave. That's why the house has passed through so many hands. But my grandmother used to say, if you refuse to look, if you cover the mirrors and never acknowledge them, eventually whatever's inside grows bored. Fades." Amelia swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" Margaret looked down at her tea, voice low. "Then you stop knowing which side of the glass you belong on." The words lodged in Amelia's chest like a stone. She thanked Margaret quietly, then walked home with her pulse racing. That night, she covered every mirror she could find. Bedsheets, towels, coats, anything to block the glass. The house felt smaller with all its reflective eyes blindfolded, but she finally breathed easier, as though she'd shut out watchful strangers. Still, when she passed the brass mirror on the mantel, she swore she heard the faint scrape of fingernails against the back of the glass. For the next 2 days, she lived carefully, avoiding reflections entirely. She kept the lights on at night, the television humming softly in the background. And though the unease never fully left, she began to feel a fragile rhythm returning. Until the third night, Amelia woke abruptly, unsure what had stirred her. The room was dim, the sheets twisted around her legs. She lay still, listening. At first, nothing but silence. Then she realized the faint rustle wasn't coming from the house. It was coming from inside the covered mirror. Her skin prickled. The fabric swayed faintly, though no air moved in the room. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shape of a hand pressed against the sheet from beneath. Fingers stretched against the fabric, straining outward, as though something on the other side were testing the barrier. Amelia clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a cry. The hand lingered, then slid slowly downward until it vanished. The fabric lay still once more. She sat upright the rest of the night, too afraid to close her eyes. By morning, she made a decision. She would sell the house. It didn't matter how much money she lost or what explanation she had to give. She couldn't live inside this place another night. But when she searched online, her laptop flickered. The listing pages refused to load. The screen flashed white, then black, then white again. And in the reflection of the darkened screen, she thought she saw her own face smiling, though her lips were pressed tight with fear. She slammed the laptop shut. Later that day, Margaret knocked on her door again. She looked more serious this time, her umbrella dripping rain onto the porch. "You shouldn't stay here," she said simply, her voice low and urgent. "You've already seen too much." Amelia clutched the doorframe. "I'm trying to leave, I swear." But she hesitated, then whispered, "It doesn't want me to." Margaret's gaze hardened. "Then don't give it permission. That's all it needs. It will trick you into looking too long, into listening, into speaking to it. If you do, it's harder to tell the difference between you and what it wants you to be." Amelia felt her chest constrict. What if it's too late? Margaret reached out and squeezed her hand. "It's never too late if you don't let in." That night, Amelia left every light on, every curtain drawn. She curled on the couch with the television playing softly. She told herself she would not look. Not at the brass mirror, not at the window glass, not at the dark screen of the TV when it flickered. But as her eyes began to close, she heard it again. A whisper, low and insistent, threading into her thoughts. "Amelia." Her chest tightened. "Let me show you." Her eyes darted to the mantel despite herself. The sheet over the brass mirror stirred faintly, as if something behind it were breathing. She clenched her fists, shaking her head. "No," she whispered hoarsely. But when she looked down at her hands, her reflection was already gripping them tightly, in the blank black glass of the switched-off television. And this time it didn't let go. The night stretched endlessly after her reflection clutched at her through the black glass of the television. Amelia sat frozen on the couch, trembling, the quilt wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, afraid to glance at any surface that might throw back her likeness. Every reflective thing felt alive now, hungry. At some point, exhaustion must have claimed her, because she woke to sunlight bleeding through the curtains. The television screen was dark and harmless, reflecting only the blurred outline of the room. The brass mirror on the mantel was still veiled in its sheet. She whispered a shaky prayer of thanks that she'd made it through the night. But the relief didn't last. By midday, Amelia noticed small inconsistencies around the house. Her shoes, left neatly by the door, now stood at crooked angles. The kitchen faucet dripped, though she hadn't used it since morning. A chair in the dining room faced slightly away from the table, as if someone had just stood. She tried to dismiss them, but a gnawing thought followed her. What if it wasn't her who had moved them? What if it was the one behind glass? When the sun dipped low, she poured herself a glass of water. Her hand shook as she set it down on the counter. The surface rippled faintly, not from her movement, but as though something had stirred inside the reflection itself. For the briefest moment, her face shimmered back at her from the water. Only the eyes were wrong. Too dark, too intent. She shoved the glass into the sink and turned away, her chest tight. That evening, she called her mother again, desperate for a steady voice. "Sweetheart," her mother answered. "Mom," Amelia whispered, trying not to let her fear bleed through. "Can you stay on the line with me for a little while?" "Of course." "What's wrong?" Amelia hesitated. She wanted to tell her everything. The reflections, the whispers, Margaret's warnings, but the words stuck in her throat. She was terrified that even speaking about it aloud would give the thing more power. "I'm just lonely here," she said instead. "The house is quiet. Too quiet." Her mother spoke gently about old houses and how they take time to feel like home. Amelia listened, clinging to the rhythm of her voice. But as she paced the living room, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The sheet on the brass mirror was slipping. It sagged lower with each passing second, though no air stirred in the room. Slowly, it peeled away from the top corner, sliding downward as if invisible fingers were tugging. Amelia stopped mid-stride, clutching the phone to her ear. "Mom," she whispered, "I have to go." Before her mother could reply, Amelia hung up and lunged forward, grabbing the fabric just before it fell completely. She pressed it tight against the mirror, hands trembling. For a heartbeat, she felt pressure from the other side, something pushing back, palm against palm, through the thin barrier. Then it was gone. She stumbled back, clutching the sheet tighter, and jammed a heavy box against the base of the mirror so the cover wouldn't shift again. That night, her dreams were worse. She dreamed she was in the upstairs hallway, every mirror uncovered, lining both walls. She walked slowly, and her reflections walked with her. But they weren't synchronized. Some turned their heads to watch her pass. Some whispered to each other, mouths moving in frantic murmurs she couldn't hear. At the far end of the hallway, one reflection stepped out of its frame. It smiled with her face, tilted its head, and whispered clearly, "You're already mine." She woke screaming, drenched in sweat. The clock beside her bed read 3:33 a.m. Amelia pressed a hand over her racing heart. She sat up, intending to get water, but froze. The fabric covering the closet mirror was gone. Her throat went dry. She scanned the floor, the corners of the room, anywhere it might have slipped. Nothing. The mirror stood bare, gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Her reflection stared back at her. Only, she wasn't sitting upright in bed. She was standing. The reflection tilted its head, lips curving into a slow, deliberate smile. Amelia scrambled for the lamp, flicking it on. The bed lit up in warm light. She looked again. The mirror was covered. The sheet hung exactly where she had pinned it. Her breath came out in ragged sobs. She stumbled downstairs, too shaken to remain in that room. The house groaned softly as the wind pushed against its frame. She curled on the couch with the television on mute, light flickering against her pale face. Around dawn, she heard a knock. She opened the door to find Margaret again. Her neighbor's eyes studied her face, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the trembling of her hands. "You look worse," Margaret said gently. Amelia laughed shakily. "I think I'm losing my mind." "You're not," Margaret said firmly. "But you can't stay here. It will keep wearing you down until you can't tell what's yours anymore. That's how it works. It feeds on your doubt." Tears filled Amelia's eyes. "I try to cover them. I try not to look, but it doesn't matter. It still finds me." Margaret hesitated, then stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "There's one more thing my grandmother used to say. If it comes too close, if you feel it pulling, you have to break the glass. It's the only way to sever the connection." Amelia's breath caught. "Break the mirrors?" Margaret nodded. "All of them. Don't hesitate. Don't look too long. Just smash them before it steps through." That night, Amelia gathered her courage. She carried a hammer from the toolbox into her bedroom, hands slick with sweat. She stood before the closet mirror, sheet still pinned tight. Her heart pounded against her ribs. If she uncovered it, she knew what she'd see. But if she didn't, the thing might stay inside forever. She gripped the hammer tighter, pulled the fabric away, and froze. Her reflection was already holding a hammer. Her fingers went numb. The hammer clattered to the floor. The reflection leaned closer, lips moving soundlessly. Amelia stumbled back, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "You're not me." The reflection's smile widened. Behind it, in the depths of the glass, the faint outline of other faces shifted. Dozens of them, pale, wide-eyed, pressing against the surface, all wearing her expression. Amelia's scream caught in her throat. The glass rippled, as though water lay just beneath its surface. And then the whisper came again, stronger than ever, filling the room from every wall. "Let me in." Amelia backed away from the closet mirror until her shoulders hit the wall. The hammer lay on the floor between her and the reflection. Her chest heaved, breath shallow, as she watched the glass ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond. The faces pressing behind her reflection shifted, mouths opening and closing silently, eyes wide and pleading. She clamped her hands over her ears, but the whisper threaded through anyway. "Let me in." "No," she whispered hoarsely. "You're not real. You're not me." Her reflection tilted its head. Its lips moved soundlessly for a moment, then pressed into a line, mirroring her denial with a grotesque mimicry. Amelia lunged forward, snatched the hammer off the floor, and swung. The mirror exploded into shards, raining down across the hardwood with a sharp, splintering crash. For a split second, relief surged through her. She had done it. She had broken the connection. But then she saw the pieces. Dozens of fragments littered the floor, each one catching her face. In every shard, her reflection stared back at her with different expressions, smiling, grimacing, wide-eyed, weeping. Some fragments showed her standing where she was, others showed her crouched, others already turning away. Her relief twisted into terror. She dropped the hammer, stumbling back as the fragments began to tremble, vibrating faintly on the floorboards. One by one they turned, not like falling glass, catching the light, but like eyes. All of them, shifting toward her at once. Her stomach heaved. She bolted from the room, slamming the door behind her. Downstairs, she leaned against the wall, chest heaving. Her ears rang with the phantom echoes of glass shattering. She told herself Margaret's advice was wrong. Breaking them hadn't severed anything. It had multiplied it. That night, she barely moved from the couch. Every reflective surface was covered, hidden, buried under whatever cloth she could find. She even unplugged the television and turned it to face the wall. But even with everything shielded, she felt them, watching, breathing with her. At some point she dozed, only to wake in darkness. The lamps had gone out. Power outage. Her pulse quickened. The silence in the house felt suffocating. She groped her way to the drawer, found a flashlight, and flicked it on. The beam cut across the room and landed on the mantel. The sheet had slipped from the brass mirror. Her reflection stared back. She froze, light trembling in her hand. The reflection didn't match her posture. It was leaning forward, palms flat against the other side of the glass. Its mouth moved silently, forming words she didn't want to understand. Amelia screamed, lunged forward, and hurled the flashlight. The glass shattered with a deafening crack. The beam spun wildly, then died. Darkness swallowed the room. And in that darkness, dozens of small, glittering shards caught the faint moonlight, each one gleaming with her face. Amelia. The whisper was everywhere now, no longer confined to one mirror. It came from the floor, from the walls, from the broken glass, scattered like teeth across the boards. She stumbled back, tripping over the rug, her hands scraping against the floor. Pain flared. She tasted iron. The fragments pulsed faintly, like embers in the dark. And in their glow, her reflections began to move. Not in sync, not in order, but independently. One bent, another straightened, another tilted its head sharply, hair falling across its face. They writhed in silence, mouths stretching open, wider and wider, as though screaming without sound. Amelia bolted upstairs. She slammed her bedroom door, heart hammering, and shoved a dresser against it. Her hands shook as she dug through a drawer, pulling out the roll of tape she had used earlier to hold down the sheets. She ripped more fabric from her closet, covering every last trace of reflective surface she could find. When she finally sank onto the mattress, sweat drenched her shirt, her body trembling. She told herself she would leave tomorrow. She would take what she could, run to her mother's house, never look back. But deep down, she feared tomorrow wouldn't come. That night, the dreams were relentless. She wandered the house in sleep, every mirror uncovered. Her reflections followed her, not from behind glass, but from the corners of the rooms themselves. They whispered in her voice, but the words were wrong. You don't belong here. You're already one of us. We've been waiting. At the foot of the stairs, she saw Margaret. Her neighbor stood silently, eyes dark, face pale. But when Amelia stepped closer, she realized it wasn't Margaret at all. It was her own reflection, wearing Margaret's clothes, lips curling into that now familiar smile. She woke with a sob, clutching her chest. Her clock read 4:44 a.m. A soft tap came from the covered mirror in her room. Her throat constricted. She stared at the fabric, willing it to stay still. But the shape of a hand pressed through again, fingers stretching outward, straining against the cloth. Let me in. No, Amelia croaked, voice shaking. She stumbled to her feet, grabbed the sheet, and yanked it tighter against the glass. But the hand pressed harder. The wood frame creaked. She stumbled back, shaking her head. No, you're not me. You can't be me. The whisper shifted, lower, more insistent. You already are. The fabric tore. A pale hand burst through, fingers curling into the room. Amelia screamed, lunged forward, and slammed the hammer into the glass. The mirror erupted, shards spilling across the floor. The hand vanished with it. For a moment, silence. Then, from every shard glittering on the floor, her face blinked up at her. All of them smiled. Amelia staggered back, the hammer slick in her hand, her breath coming in jagged gasps. The shards glimmered across the floor like 1,000 tiny eyes, each one catching her face. Too many faces. They blinked, smiled, frowned, whispered soundlessly. She pressed her palms to her ears, but the voices were inside her head now, layered and overlapping like a chorus. We're here. We're waiting. You've already joined us. No, Amelia Raspez. She stumbled into the hallway, nearly slipping on the broken glass. She had to get out of the house, out of Willow Lane, out of whatever nightmare had tangled itself around her. She bolted down the stairs, her bare feet thudding against the wood. At the front door, she fumbled with the lock, fingers trembling too violently to turn it. Her reflection stared at her from the glass pane beside the door. Though the house was dark, and there should have been no reflection at all, it smiled, raised its hand in a mocking wave, and mouthed the word she dreaded. Let me in. Amelia screamed, slammed her palm against the glass, and wrenched the lock open. She burst outside into the pre-dawn air, lungs burning. The sky was a dull gray, the street empty, the trees skeletal silhouettes. She ran barefoot down the road toward Margaret's cottage, gravel biting her skin, the cold air tearing at her throat. When she reached the little white house, she pounded on the door until her fists ached. Lights flicked on inside. At last, Margaret opened the door, her robe pulled tight around her, her face creased with worry. Amelia? Amelia collapsed into her arms. It's coming through the mirrors. I broke them, but it's worse. It's everywhere now. Margaret pulled her inside quickly, shutting the door. She guided Amelia to a chair at the kitchen table, poured her water, and pressed it into her shaking hands. You did what I told you, Margaret said quietly. You broke the glass? Amelia nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. It didn't work. It multiplied. They're everywhere. I can't stop seeing them. Margaret's expression darkened. She sat opposite her, eyes heavy with something like pity. Then it's too late. Amelia froze. What do you mean? Margaret folded her hands, voice low and even. Breaking the mirrors severs the reflection. But once you've looked too long, once you've listened, it's not the glass that binds you anymore. It's recognition. The moment you believe in it, it believes in you. And then, there's no undoing it. Amelia's stomach churned. So what am I supposed to do? Margaret reached out, touching her hand gently. All you can do is fight to hold onto yourself. Don't forget who you are. Don't let them convince you otherwise. Amelia's chest heaved. She wanted to argue, to beg for another solution, but the words caught in her throat. Because over Margaret's shoulder, in the dark window above the sink, Amelia saw her own reflection watching her intently. Its lips curved into a secret smile. Amelia jolted, knocking over the glass of water. The spills spread across the table in a shining pool, her warped reflection glinting back from its surface. Dozens of tiny faces shimmered within it, mouths whispering, eyes unblinking. She shoved the chair back, stumbling to her feet. I have to leave. I can't stay here. I can't. Margaret rose quickly, gripping her shoulders. Running won't help. It's inside you now. Wherever you go, it follows. No. Amelia whispered, tears blurring her vision. You're wrong. It's the house. If I leave, I'll be free. Margaret's eyes softened, but her grip stayed firm. Then try. But remember this, Amelia, the more you run, the easier it is for them to catch up. Sometimes the only way to win is not to look back. Amelia pulled free, bolted to the door, and into the morning gray. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, parked along the curb. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the keys, flung the door open, and slid inside. The rearview mirror loomed above her. She tore it down with trembling hands and tossed it onto the street. The engine roared to life. She pressed the accelerator hard, tearing down Willow Lane, past the black trees and the sagging fences, past the mailbox that still bore her name in fresh paint. She didn't slow until the road curved back toward the highway. Only then did she let out a shaky breath. She glanced at the side window, at the faint reflection of her own face in the glass. It wasn't looking at the road. It was looking at her. Her hands spasmed on the wheel. She swerved, tires screeching, barely regaining control. The reflection's lips moved in sync with the whisper curling through her thoughts. Almost home. Amelia screamed, slammed her palm against the glass, and forced herself not to look again. She fixed her eyes on the horizon, the rising sun a dull glow at the edge of the world. She drove for hours, not stopping, not daring to rest. Only when exhaustion threatened to blur her vision did she pull into a small roadside motel. Inside the room, she ripped down the bathroom mirror, covered the TV with a blanket, turned the screen of her phone face down. She sat curled on the bed, whispering to herself, rocking slightly. I'm real. I'm me. I'm Amelia. But when she blinked, she swore the shadows at the edges of the room blinked back. That night, she dreamed of the house on Willow Lane again. She stood before the closet mirror, the brass-framed mirror, the shards across the floor. All of them reflected her, and none of them did. One step forward. It looked exactly like her, but calmer, steadier, smiling faintly as though it knew the ending before she did. You don't have to fight, it whispered. You never did. You were always one of us. Amelia shook her head violently. No, I'm real. I'm me. The reflection tilted its head, pity soft in its eyes. Are you sure? She woke gasping, sweat soaking her sheets. The motel room was dim and still. She stumbled to the sink for water. When she looked down, the water's surface shimmered. Her reflection smiled. This time, it didn't wait for her to move. Ending twist, YouTube-friendly the next day, when Margaret walked past the house on Willow Lane, she noticed something strange. The curtains had been drawn open. In the window, she saw Amelia smiling, as though she had never left. But the house was empty.